أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today I wanted to share some thoughts on a few verses from Surah-Saad, which is the 38th chapter of the Quran. And these verses capture some very interesting discussions about the nature of polytheism, the origins of polytheism, and some of the objections that the polytheists had against the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Surah-Saad is the 38th chapter of the Quran, and in verse 5, the polytheists make a very interesting case against the Prophet. They say, why is this man taking all of our gods and trying to make it one? What is his objective? How dare he kind of do this, right? So in verse 5, we read, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم أجعل الآلهة إلها واحد إن هذا لشيء عجاب. Does he make all of our gods into a single god? This is a ajib thing. This is ujab, right? La shay'in ujab. And then they go on to say, وَانْتَلَكَ الْمَلَائِ مِنْهُمْ أَنِمْشُوا وَاسْبِرُوا عَلَى إِلَهَتِكُمْ إِنَّ هَذَا لَشَيْءٌ يُرَادٌ. This is a very interesting verse. This is verse 6, where the mala, as in the kind of chieftains amongst the polytheists, tell the other polytheists, keep following your gods, all the various gods you have. This person is trying to get power. That is his objective, right? So the polytheists are saying he's converting all of these gods that we have and destroying them and making his own god because his intention is power. In fact, the same allegation was made against Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, where in Surah Al-Mu'minun we read the polytheists are saying, مَا هَذَا إِلَّا بَشْرٌ مِثْلُكُمْ يُرَادُ أَنْ يَتَفَضَّلَ عَلَيْكُمْ. So the polytheists at the time of Nuh also made the same claim, that Nuh alayhi salam is trying to destroy all your false gods because he wants to have fadila over you, right? So the allegation that the polytheists are making is, number one, it's weird that he is trying to destroy all our gods and make it one. The second allegation is he's doing it because he wants to gain power. And then the third allegation is in verse 7, right? Which is, they say, مَا سَمِعَنَا بِهَذَا فِي الْمِلَّةِ الْآخِرَةِ إِنْ هَذَا إِلَّا اخْتِلَاقٌ. They say this is an invention. We've never heard something like this before. We've never heard about this concept of one God. We've never been told that these false gods, these gods are all false gods. So that's the third allegation. And the fourth allegation is أَأُنزِلَ عَلَيْهِ الذِّكْرَ min bainina. So they say, why wasn't this revelation sent to us? So the polytheists are basically making a number of claims against monotheism and Rasulullah. The first one being is that this is weird. Why is he converting all our gods into one? The second one is that he's doing it for power, for gaining power. The third is, we've never heard this kind of message before. And then the fourth one is that, why wasn't this revealed to us? Why was it revealed to this person, right? And even today, when you have discussions with, people who don't follow monotheism, you hear very, very similar objections and debates. And now what's interesting is when you read about the origins of polytheism in Arabia, right? Polytheism is not a very natural thing. You don't wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to worship all these things. Right? When you read about the history of polytheism in Arabia, you can read about it in Ibn Ishaq and Ibn Hisham and Ibn al-Kalbi and other people who've written about these. You find that in fact the origins of polytheism was after Ismail alayhi salam, who created Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam, who created, of course, the Kaaba. The Meccans slowly started to confuse their worship. They thought the Kaaba itself was the object of worship, right? The Kaaba was just the baits of Allah. You were worshipping Allah, not His house. But of course, people started confusing it. And you find this even today, where people start worshipping saints, right? The saints say worship God, but then slowly people start worshipping the saints themselves. So in in these historical books, you actually start reading that the Meccans started to take stones, little stones from the Kaaba with them when they would go on all these trade journeys, and that they would actually take these stones and kind of do tawaf around those stones wherever they are, just like they're doing tawaf. So, in other words, they started this way, and then eventually they started getting influenced by the various civilizations around them. For example, fire worship, or at least respect for the fire, was very common amongst the Zoroastrians who lived towards the east of the Arabs. And then they would get slowly statues from other places. For example, one of the first statues that we believe came into the Kaaba was the statue of Hubal, which was given to somebody named Amr, who got it from the Amalekites, right? He saw them worshipping and they said, this statue is very powerful. And so they brought the statue of Hubal. The Arabs also slowly started worshipping nature, right? So the worship of the stars, the planets, Venus was very, very common amongst the Babylonians, the Sabaeans, the Chaldeans. So for example, Allat, right, which is mentioned in the Quran, which is the sun god. There was a very, very significant temple for Allat in the city of Ta'if, right? People worshipped Al-Uzza, which people think is actually a number of trees, or a set of trees in a valley in the Arabian Peninsula. And they were also worshipping pigeons and deer and lots of other animals. So you start to see that if you really read about the history of polytheism in any place, whether it's in the Arabian Peninsula or in the Middle East, in places like India, or in eastern regions, polytheism is not a natural state, right? The natural inclination for man is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to worship God. But then slowly all these various inventions start influencing you, and then before you know it, you end up with all these different idols. And this is, of course, the main mission of the Prophet, is to remind people, the same people who are saying, in hada illa ikhtilaq, they're saying this is an invention. They're telling the Prophet that you are inventing a religion, right? Ma samiyana bihada al-millati al-akhirah. We've never heard this before. So the Prophet is really telling these people, you think I'm inventing. What you're missing is that you, for the last several hundred years after Ibrahim alayhi salam and Ismail alayhi salam, you have been concocting lots of things. But of course, what happens is, when you grow up in a culture, when you grow up in a civilization, when you grow up in a family, you believe that whatever the family tells you, you believe that whatever the civilization tells you, whatever the culture tells you, is the truth. And it's very hard for us to break out of that, right? Especially when someone comes and tells you, you're wrong. Whatever your parents taught you, that's wrong. Whatever your grandparents taught you, that's wrong. Our first reaction is to defend them. And that's a good thing. We have to defend our family. But many people stop there. They just defend their family members and then they stop. They never think about, where did my parents get these gods and these idols from? Why are they even worshipping these? Is there a scriptural evidence for this? Does Bhagwan or Allah or someone else actually tell us to worship them? And this is the journey that we all have to go through in order to discover the truth. And so this beautiful surah, in these very simple verses, capture the irony, the paradox of polytheism, which is that polytheism is actually a very unfamiliar, counterintuitive concept. The most intuitive fitra, the primordial nature of man, is to worship God. We all understand God. But it's because of all of these corruptions that slowly we end up with lots of different idols and lots of deities. And in these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us. And eventually, Allah tells us, do these people have the treasures of the mercy of your Lord? Am indahum khaza'inu rahmatan rabbik al-aziz al-wahhab. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically reminds us that these people don't have any dalil, they don't have any proof. They are basically making up stuff and concocting stories and defending them because of their ignorance. So the basic mission of the Prophet, and I think it's the mission of all Muslims, is to talk to people, and before we tell them about Islam, just ask them, well, you're worshipping all these things, you're worshipping all these deities, you're worshipping all these idols, these asnam. Where does it come from? Why are you doing this? Are you doing this simply because your parents told you so? If so, where did your parents get it from? And eventually, when you go back to the trail and you follow the breadcrumbs, you realize that these were just simple inventions. There was no basis for any of this. Wallahu alam. But I always found that the discussions between the polytheists and the Prophet ﷺ and God in the Quran to be very significant in pointing to some very deep truths about the way civilization works, the way humanity works, and just culture and corruption works. I hope you enjoyed this short video. Please leave your comments and suggestions in the comment section. And see you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.